Welcome everybody, it is my great pleasure to lead you through one of the most exciting games of the whole Candidates 2020 so far. It's the game Kirill Alekseenko with the white pieces, the Russian against the Frenchman Maxime vachier-lagrave, and let's get right into it. e4, c5, and vachier-lagrave plays his beloved knight off, the first knight off in the tournament. This Sicilian opening is one of the sharpest chess openings there is, and this game is definitely a statement to that. f3 was played here. White has a lot of choices. f3 preparing the English attack with bishop e3 and possibly later on g4, g5. Now the reply by vachier-lagrave is a slight surprise. He did not play e5 as he usually does in this variation, but he went e6. Just one move forward with the e-pawn. Bishop e3, b5, queen d2, knight b7, and now a surprise, slight, well, unusual move here by Alekseenko himself. The third plate in this position, a3. Instead, castle or g4 are clearly the main moves. a3 only played a few hundred times, whereas the other moves over 1,000 times. Now, vachier-lagrave used this opportunity to stop white from going g4 by going h5. This move is seen in a lot of different knight variations, and well, now it's becoming much more difficult to play g4. On the other hand, black weaknesses square g5, and this pawn can also become a weakness in some lines. Double-edged move. Castle, bishop b7, king b1, bishop e7, and interestingly enough, this position vachier-lagrave already had on the board twice in 2 games against the world champion Magnus Carlsen. Once Carlsen played rook g1 and once queen e1, and it was also quite recent at the London Chess Classics last year in December at the final of the Grand Chess Tour. Of course, vachier-lagrave had done his homework, and we will see his improvement over the Carlsen game. Rook g1, preparing g4 for the future, bishop e2, knight to b6, hinting at knight c4, so the queen retreats to e1, knight fd7, g4, h takes, rook takes. So far so good. This all has been seen in Carlsen against vachier-lagrave, and here Vachier protected his pawn on g7 with bishop f8, but this is not a good idea. Instead, king f8 should be played, or like Vachier did in this game, MVL played g6. King f8 has been seen in some correspondence games and is also completely fine for black. g6 is kind of a provocation, because suddenly there are different sacrifices in the air. Knight takes e6, or also what Alekseenko played, rook takes g6, offering a full rook, but black should not take this one because of knight takes e6 and the queen is trapped on d8. For that reason, vachier-lagrave plays a counter sacrifice. Rook takes c3, very typical by the way in the Sicilian, the exchange sack on c3. And here white has 2 moves available, and Alekseenko spent a lot of time figuring out the details, calculating, which indicate that he was not in his preparation anymore, and at some point he must have been surprised because, well, vachier-lagrave had this position on the board still against Carlsen, but it was a different move order, and maybe Alekseenko was surprised by this 6e6 that we saw here and only expected, or mostly expected, e5. So let's get back to the current position. Rook takes c3, everything is hanging. Well, what does white do? What did Alekseenko do? He sacrificed yet another piece with knight takes e6. We see in one game several typical tactical motives that there are in the knight of opening. Queen takes c3 was a possible alternative. Now black should not take on g6 because of knight takes e6, hitting the queen, hitting the rook, and black just loses material. Instead, knight a4 is necessary to first push the queen away. Queen goes to d2. Now black can take on g6, knight takes e6, and now we see why the rook sacrificed itself. The queen has space to go to c8. Here white is a piece down for 2 pawns, but the black king is unsafe and the position is roughly equal. Bishop g5, knight f6, knight back to d4, and it's a complex position still, of course. Let's see the game. Knight takes e6. What is going on? Well, the point is if black now takes this knight, then white takes on c3, immediately attacking the rook on h8, thus not giving black time to play knight a4. And here after knight e5, for example, bishop takes b6, queen takes, rook takes e6. White has 3 pawns plus the rook against 2 minor pieces. That's more than enough material, and the black king is still open. Black is losing here. That's no good. So black just ignores everything and plays queen c8, and what a crazy position it is. We have so many pieces hanging. White has 2 options. Knight g7, which Alekseenko played, or bishop d4. Just attack more pieces. Why not? Well, here the game could continue with f takes g6. Finally, one side is grabbing some material. Bishop takes c3, knight e5. And white has to be precise here not to be worse. And probably this is why Alekseenko did not like it. Queen g1, very cute move, hitting this one on g6 and hitting the knight on b6. Queen takes e6, queen takes b6. Let's just have a quick look at this variation before we return to the game. White is still a piece down, but he has enough play. One possible variation, rook takes h2, queen takes b7, rook takes e2, and now it is a perpetual check because black cannot avoid it sensibly. King f7 would be a terrible mistake. Rook h1 and queen and rook will deliver a strong attack. And if black plays bishop d8, then white picks up this pawn on a6, hits the pawn on d6. So this is even better for white. He has enough for the piece. Instead, black should play king d7, and now white can repeat the moves. King d7 back, it's a draw. So bishop d4 was also possible, but I think knight g7 a better practical choice by Alekseenko. King f8 is forced, king d8 would be a mistake. You can see the bar is telling us white is winning after bishop takes b6, knight takes b6, rook takes d6, yet another rook sacrifice, bishop takes, rook takes, king c7, and now many moves win, but queen g3 is a cute move. White is down a rook, but he has several threats. Here a discovered attack, the rook is hanging. This is just game over. Back to again, king f8, vachier-lagrave, I believe, still in his preparation, and rook h6, an important move to move the attack piece with tempo. Now rook takes h6 is forced, king takes g7 loses right away because of queen g1, and it's checkmate in a few moves, or queen g3 for that matter. And rook g8 is also no good. White takes on c3, and black again cannot take this knight on g7. If he takes with the rook, then there's rook h8 followed by bishop h6. The rook falls, white wins. Or king takes g7, and here white has a quite cute win. So try to figure this out at home. What can white play here? Stop the video right now if you want to. Queen g1 check, king f8, and now queen takes g8. Beautiful. King takes rook g1. If king f8, then black is mated with rook h8. So black has to throw in between the bishop, but in the end, white picks up the queen and is up in exchange and simply completely winning. Let's get back to the game and see what happened there. And for some reason my engine stopped working, so we have to do without. I can tell you the variation, it's not winning for white, it's equal at this point. Rook h6, rook takes h6, bishop takes, and now rook takes c2, that's important. And you would think there would be some strong discovered attack with the knight, but as of right now, nothing is possible and the position remains even. Knight f5 check, king e8, and here white has a lot of different choices, but I think Alekseenko, also considering his low amount of time he had left, made a really good practical choice taking on e7. Knight takes, king takes, and queen h4 check, and for first time, black has to take an important decision. How is he going to deal with this check? Well, there are 2 options pretty much. f6, which MVL played, or knight f6. King e8 looks good at first, but rook g1 is very strong, bringing another piece in the attack. After knight f8, bishop takes f8, king takes f8, white has a very powerful move, very important move, which is e5. e5 to open up more diagonals and files against the king and giving the queen this square on f6 where it's protected. So for example, rook takes e2 is no good because white is checkmating in a few moves, and now the engine bar would be actually correct again. White is winning. And if black takes this pawn, then white can also give a lot of checks, and here the best black can do is trade the queens, but in the end this rook is hanging on c2 and white wins. Back to the game. Well, first let's look at this other move, this other possibility, knight f6. What do you think about this going into this pin? Well, white can play yet another rook sacrifice here, rook takes d6, but black should not accept it. After king takes d6, queen takes f6, white is once again winning because the black king, well, has to go to the c file at some point. So for example here, and then white picks up the rook, is 3 pawns up, plus attack against the king, game over. Instead, after rook takes d6, instead of taking, black can go knight bd7, and here white could retreat maybe with rook d2 or play rook takes d7, and in the end it ends in a perpetual once again. The king stays on the light squares to avoid the involvement of the bishop, and it's a draw. Both sides cannot avoid it. Wow, some crazy variations. Let's get back to the game and see what happened there. f6. The drawback of this move f6 is that the 7th rank has been weakened and white wants to exploit that fact. Bishop f4, also hitting the pawn on d6. And now yet another rook sacrifice, and that is also somewhat necessary to force matters and achieve a draw. Rook takes b2, king takes b2, and knight a4 check. The king has to go to b1. If he goes to any other square, the queen can come in to the position with check and deliver the checkmate on b2. So king b1 is forced, knight c3 check, now king a1, and knight takes d1. Now white has some time available. He could take back the knight, it would also not change matters. Queen h7 was played, and here the king could pretty much go to any of these 3 squares, all lead to a draw. King d8 was played, queen g8, king e7, queen h7 back, and the players actually repeated moves and a draw was agreed. I was thinking during the game that white could try this endgame here with his bishop pair and the passed pawn. It looks good at first sight, but black has a good plan available. Knight e5 followed by bishop h3 and bishop g2 and let's say king b1. Then, well, either white has to give up the pawn or he has to trade on e5 when he certainly does not have any advantage. So that's also a draw, and probably Alekseenko recognized that as well. So the players repeated moves and agreed to a draw right here. It was pretty much a perfect game. Well, maybe not pretty much. It was a perfect game from both players, and both players navigated these complications really well. Well, you also have to say vachier-lagrave did not have to play many moves of his own, as he was quite well prepared and did his homework, improved over the game against Magnus Carlsen. But Alekseenko seemed to be out of the prep rather early and then found his way through the jungle. A lot of rook sacrifices, a lot of fun. This is how chess should be, and I hope you enjoyed this game as much as I have. Let me know in the comments what you thought and if you found this queen sack with queen takes g8. Also, make sure to check out my other game analysis, the game Nepomniachtchi against Wang Hao from the same round. Very important game for the standings. And if you haven't subscribed yet, click the subscribe button, then you get notified when I publish new analysis, not if, when, because I'm definitely going to do it. I think you also have to hit this bell button to make sure you really get the notification. All right, that's all from me. We'll see each other next time. Until then, bye bye.